So, welcome back, Lisa and Julie. We have some time allocated now to dive into the post-webinar Q&A session for our topic of forecasting best practices for resource management. Very excited. You have generously decided to join us here and dive into all the remaining questions that our audience was sharing with us. So let's dive right into it. The first question is, do you follow precise processes to update schedules? The planning of a project is not always definite, but changes based on the life of the project itself. How do you manage this type of situation, which can affect another allocation in a short time?
Sure. So I think the interlocks are key to that as well. Having that regular communication, the regular evaluation of what's going on within those projects, and just setting a regular cadence and setting that regular schedule of what you're going to cover in the interlocks to make sure that all of those issues are addressed.
Yep.
Beautiful.
I agree. I think the key in terms of a precise process, I think that's going to be individual to every organization. Everybody's going to have a different process. But what has to be sort of common is there has to be communication. There has to be meetings. At the end of the day, having one joint tool is really, really useful as well. So everyone can have transparency. So I know some organizations don't necessarily have a culture of huge transparency, but I would definitely recommend that. So having one tool where all of the projects are living, and not just yours, but you're seeing what other people's projects are, can help you to be able to sort of say, okay, well, I'm going to need to make a change, but I can see that we have no capacity, or I can see that John's team has somebody that's going to be finished soon. So it can also arm your PMs to make better decisions and to predict and forecast and communicate those needs to you earlier than they would when they're just being reactive. And then the other process that I would probably recommend, and this is more from a project management perspective. I'm a project manager, and is you can't predict the future, right? But you have to sort of almost do that. So what I would also recommend is adding a little bit more buffer in your projects, a little bit more room. So what I mean is you don't necessarily have to overestimate, but adding a little bit of buffer can't hurt. So for example, if I need a project that I need, again, 40 engineers or 10 engineers, 40 hours each, I may actually request 12, right? I may make that request to just get a little bit extra, and understanding that time off, sick days, things may happen, and I may get I may end up with 11 on the project, but then I have a little bit of room to just account for things that are dynamic or scope creep or things that are added. So I have a little bit more room, so a little bit of area, and those engineers that are allotted to my project that may not be at full time, maybe they're only allotted 50% of their time to my project, that's perfect. That still leaves them 50% capacity to work on something else. But that also just gives me that buffer to ensure that I can still deliver that project. Some projects are not going to be as dynamic, but when these projects are going to change a lot, it's always kind of nice to have that extra buffer in the resourcing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Question number 2, does the resource management office deal with technical managers for allocations or decide autonomously? Julie, can I point this question to you?
Sure. So I think that depends on what model you're using, right? When you're looking at a hybrid model, I would say yes. You are working with other managers, you are working with other departments to make sure that the allocations are made. If you're a true centralized RMO by definition, you're really making those calls within that RMO and looking across practices, across business units, and really kind of setting everything in place that needs to be done.
Nice. Thank you. Anything you would add from your experience, Lisa?
No, I agree. It does depend on the model. I think the only thing I would add is maybe just in my experience as well, when I would, we would do requests. So you would request perhaps some specific technical engineers from your technical, and then the idea is that these requests, they have to be much more precise than they would be for other roles. So I would want to be I need, JavaScript, very experienced JavaScript who also can do CSS. Right? I'd want more precision so that we're at least the resource manager is getting closer to the right person. But on a technical perspective, you're still going to want your TAMs to review your requirements. Another thing that they can also do is they may have people that they have in mind. So even if it's centralized, I'd still want the TAM to actually request somebody specifically. It would be great if they give me a short list, 5 top people that they love to work on this project. And that really helps in sort of putting the right people on the right projects as well.
Mm. Nice. Great addition. Thank you both very much. Question number 3 from our audience. With what precision and detail do you compile the skills in your inventory? So here we're talking about skills inventory, a very relevant topic. Julie, can I point the question towards you to kick us off?
So skills inventory is a delicate balance, right? You want to have enough skills where you can make great assignments, but you don't want to have so many skills where it muddies the water. I think you need to look at what skills are used the most. I think you need to look at, is it something you can leave more general, or is it something you really need to drill down to something more specific? The other piece of that to keep in mind when you're looking at that is, what is your update process going to look like? You know, if you have 1,000 skills in there and you're working with a team of 30 or 40 people, chances are they're going to go through the first maybe 100, maybe 200, and everything beyond that is going to kind of fall off the radar of everyone. So I think that's a much harder question to answer than it seems to be on paper, right? And I think it also depends on your business and how many different skills are needed to deliver your projects.
Nice. Thank you.
Sure.
Lisa, keen to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fills into how you build your skills inventory. I think Julie's right. Too many is just going to determine. And we've seen organizations that have had 200 skills. And at the end of the day, you're right. Nobody's adding any skills to anybody. It's just too much. So what I would say for skills inventory, what's important is actually, it's almost like the work you put in before is actually going to dictate whether it's successful or not. And what I mean by that is you want a centralized way to collect skills, which is not necessarily as easy as you would think, right? So it is a bit of doing research, first of all, meeting with the different types of business units, understanding the skills that they need to complete the work they do. And then sort of designing a more central way to group those skills as well, and determining which ones are important, which ones are not important in project work. It's great that they have great communication skills and they can present well. That's awesome, but I don't know if it really helps me in delivering a digital project. So I would want to be sure that the ones that we are grouping are the correct skills as well. And then again, making sure that they're almost categorized, right? Maybe you have 5 categories and within those there's 10 in each, but you don't want to get too big because it will become overwhelming. Obviously tools like Run and other softwares will help you narrow those down and create those filters. But when you're looking to maintain that skill set, if it's too vast, it's just going to fall out of date. So really, you want to be sure that you are looking at it from a top perspective, you're grouping them, they're categorizing them. And then of course you're deciding before you roll this out, who is maintaining the skills inventory. That's a key part as well. And a lot of people's like, is that HR? Is that, a specific software? All of those could be correct answers. It really depends on what your organization wants. But there has to be some responsibility. So it's an annual review. Perhaps you are sending it out to individual people and they have to fill out their skills. Perhaps it's their manager that does it. But one way or the other, you have to be sure before you even started that you know exactly how you're going to collect the data and how you're going to maintain that data.
Beautiful. Yeah. The key here is ownership, right? And responsibility. So that all the effort you put into creating an inventory is actually worthwhile and will not be tossed the year after you implement it. Couldn't agree more. The next question follows up on the theme of skills inventory. So our audience members sharing, I recently dove into this arena for the first time, and I'm sure it's a mess. I'm looking for any assistance. I am an administrative manager and need assistance in onboarding new teams or staff and how to best estimate the tasks we will be performing and how much time they will take and how this will affect FTE needs. So for someone just starting in that space and skills inventory, what would be something you could advise? And Lisa, let's start with you this time.
Sure. I think this question has lots of different components to it, and it involves also a little bit of what a project manager does. But I think overall, first question I would ask is, where are you at in your maturity processes? And this company may be a little bit less mature or more mature, really depends, because you don't necessarily have to start with roles when you are doing a resource plan. You can actually start with skills. I mean, you can start with roles as well. So if you're at the very beginning of your journey and you're not quite sure how to build this out, one of my recommendations would be to, first of all, look at all the different roles in your company, right? Because there's probably some very specific skills connected to each role. So that's going to make it a little bit easier for you to get a bigger picture on the roles on the skills connected to each role. So even if you don't have the skills matrix up to date, even if you're not finished building it out, you can still start sourcing and capacity planning and capacity forecasting based on roles. It's not going to be as efficient because it's not as targeted, but it's still the way lots and lots of organizations function, and it can still be pretty effective as well. So first off, analyze, do you need to do skills right away, or is roles going to be sufficient to predict and forecast and capacity plan? So that's the first thing I would say, especially if you're new to this space. The second,
Nice.
if you are ready for a skills inventory, there is process, right? And I talked about it in the previous question, where really this is not, it doesn't live in a bubble. It's not you who's asking each person what their skills are. It doesn't work that way. It's just not going to be efficient. So it is really about understanding who the stakeholders are, having, meetings, doing the brainstorming sessions, figuring out what skills are important, coming up with those categories, coming up with those proficiency level, what's important, what's a 1 versus a 5, what is, you have to really narrow down, and doing that pre-work before you actually roll it out. And then, of course, going into a system of collecting that information, lots of ways to collect that information effectively as well. Won't dive in too much into that as well, but definitely this is one where I would leverage your people and culture, your HR department to be gathering this data. But the reality is you do have to sort of look at this from a cohesive level of, you can't just start with skills and have all of it, because it does take a lot more time to sort of collect that. So ask yourself, can I do this without skills right away? Can I start with roles? And if I can't, how can I I have to allot a bit of time here. I'm looking at a 40 to 80 hour project to get a full skills inventory set up for myself if it's a small organization. So no, if Julie, what is in your experience, how would you go about this?
Sure. So yes, a lot of the same way, right? You have to start small, you have to build on it. Your skills inventory is very much kind of a living, breathing thing. There's always going to be updates, whether it's adding new skills, maybe taking skills that are now obsolete out of there, updating proficiency levels and making sure that you do have that good process in place. Um, I think some of the other things that were challenges when I was building a skills inventory was every practice and every business unit had their own idea of what was important. And suddenly I have 2,500 line items. How do you narrow that down? And really getting everyone aligned and on the same page. A lot of that was sending out the list and saying, okay, we can't have this. It was that transparency and here's what we need to do. And I think part of that, when I laid out the process of the updates, it really made it clear to those stakeholders who were determining what skills were there, what they really needed to focus on and what was important. So, it's a buy-in from a lot of different people at a lot of different levels. One of the other things was determining who was going to validate, what skill this person had and at what proficiency level. It's When I went into it, I thought, oh, I'm just going to get some skills, right? And I can load them into the system and this is going to be easy. And it turned out to be so much more complex than I anticipated. Be patient, leave yourself a lot of time, revise, 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 and then revise again before you load anything into the system.
Some great advice from both of you. Thank you so much. Lots of value in there, but also lots of challenges. The next question is around complex allocations. How do you manage the more complex allocations when it comes to maintenance, service level agreements, etc.? So, Julie, can you kick us off?
Sure. So I think when you look at a complex project, you have to look and see, what are the different stages? What are the different milestones? I think you're doing kind of the same project planning in some respects, but are you kicking it off to maybe a support function afterwards? Is there hypercare that's needed? what type of project it is. There's so many factors that go into that. And then also what's been promised to that client. You know, you want to make sure that you meet all of those requirements as well. I would say take your project plan and take it one step further.
Nice.
Yeah, I agree. It's not, I mean, obviously, in CS, we have a lot of ones where we have maintenance phases and SLAs, and it's never as easy as sort of a more standardized waterfall type of project. But I think the idea is that absolutely there is obviously going to be more complexity because things may move around. You have to be adherent to specific things that have been promised to the customer. So a couple of things I would just add to what Julia said. One is it needs to be in a central place and everybody needs to understand what's actually required of them. So having in one software and never talking about it and just putting allocations isn't going to work for that level of complexity. You're going to want to have regular project meetings so everyone's aware of what's going on as well. The other thing I would factor in here is actuals as well. So tracking deliverables, especially for SLAs, especially if you allotted a certain amount of response time for issues, or alternately you have to deliver a certain amount of service hours. That has to be tracked, right? And obviously it might be tracked in a financial system, but you actually still need to allot for that amount of time. So how does a CSM even track their time on a complex when they might spend 15 minutes here, 2 minutes here doing things for clients? How do you track that? That's a really sort of pretty universal problems in all of the sort of CS account management world. So once again, lots of ways to sort of do it. Generally, what I tend to recommend is to assign a percentage of capacity to the project for that person. So when you're looking at some complexity, you don't have to say they're going to work 8 hours. You can say, well, we're approximating that they're spending 10% of their time on this project. They have 10 clients. We expect them to be spending 10% on this one, 5%. So being a little bit more general in this case allows you to sort of get at least their time is booked off, so they do have some capacity to do the work. And then adding their actuals, you're going to learn. You're going to learn where they're working, how they're working, when they're working, so that when that project continues, perhaps in the next quarter where you're just on a full maintenance phase, you've kind of seen how it's gone the quarter before, and you kind of understand actually they need about 12 hours and they tend to dedicate their time really just on Mondays and Tuesdays. So you can get more precise by learning from what has happened in the past as well. But until you kind of understand precisely what people are working on, using percentages can be a little bit more flexible for you at the time until you need to really add concrete numbers.
Very nice. Thank you both very much. There are two more questions. The next one is around what advice do you have for resource managers out there to improve their forecasting moving forward? What's your best piece of advice? Can be multiple too. And Lisa, why don't you kick us off?
I pretty sound like a broken record, but I think the best advice I would give to resource management is data hygiene. I'd say that this is a crucial, I know we're doing a webinar on data governance as well coming up, and I think that's a very important topic. But I think for resource managers, you can't make the right decisions without the right data. You're really working with blinders on if you don't know what's going on. So the advice I would give is if they're struggling to make the right predictions, they don't have the right data, and they have to look at what's missing. Is our skills matrix out of date? Something has slipped. Are project managers not updating the fields? Are we not putting our actuals? And look at the problem. Try to find the issue that your data is not up to date and in real time. And then institute different processes to change that, right? So it might be a simple matter of like you set up a call with all your PMs on Fridays, and every Friday in front of you, they log into the system and update the system. Like that could be, it might sound a little bit difficult, but that's what I worked for a sort of larger company as a freelancer, but that's actually what I implemented, and it worked. They were held more accountable. And then when I left the company and I finished my project, they actually continued that trend because it became something that was just part of their nature. We'd all have coffee. I'd bring donuts from Cardam's, was a really nice donut place. We'd sit, have coffee, we'd all type in things. So sometimes it's also about just changing their mindset. And for a resource manager, that's crucial to sort of get that data. And you have to find a way to break through and get that buy-in and that interest in the resource management space.
And donuts certainly can help. I would totally subscribe to that. Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Julie, what would you add?
Sure. The only thing I think I would add, and I've said this previously, live in your resource planner. Always check. It's an ever-changing document. It's an ever-changing view of what's going on. So make sure you're always in there. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask the questions, right? Is this correct? Does this need to change? What's going on with this? And just communication. It really just keeps coming back to communication.
Mm, beautiful. Thank you both very much. Last but not least, the final question for this post-webinar Q&A is around what are the key challenges organizations face when integrating forecasting into their resource management strategies, and how can these challenges be overcome? Julie, would you be able to kick us off?
Sure. So, we talked about change management, right? And really, it all comes back to that. Change management is the hardest piece for people to get behind. So I think it's establishing a process, staying consistent to what you're doing and really educating them on what the process is, why you're doing the process, and what the benefits are across all of the stakeholders with that process.
Mm, nice. Lisa,
Uh,
curious to
yeah,
hear your thoughts.
yeah, absolutely. Change management obviously going to be one of my top things. Absolutely agree. To add to that, I would probably add two other things. The one I would add is leadership buy-in. And I think this is really undervalued, but you need a champion at the highest level because you need people to be pushing that this is something that has to be done. Now, in a nice way, obviously you don't want to be like forcing it. So if you don't have leadership buy-in, then at least getting some key brand champ, like sort of resource champions within your organization is really important. And for that, even when we're doing an implementation and we're talking about change management, I always recommend that when we're doing the change management process, they look for people that are influential in the business, that people like, that people respond well to. And we say, put them on the focus group, have them participate in a pilot or a proof of concept, have them give you feedback as well. Some of the best feedback we've ever received at Run has been from these smaller pilot groups of like these really people that are not really into resource management. They don't really know it, but they're starting to get interested into it. And they come up and say, you know what, it would be great if you had this in the system. And it's kind of like, this is great feedback. This is how we can leverage it and make it a better tool for you guys. So I would say like, look for either like a leadership champion or alternately some influential champions within your organization so that they are putting out the word that this is actually being really, really useful. And also that it can benefit people individually. One of our clients also came to us from, people come to us from really different perspectives, but this one came to us from the perspective of very high turnover. They had a really bad attrition rate. And they said, we keep losing our top performers. They keep quitting and we don't know why. And they say that they're burnt out. And when we looked at the issue that they were facing is these top performers were top performers. So they were being over allocated and they were getting hours and hours. And then meanwhile, the newest juniorist employees who were there, needing some direction weren't getting assigned to any projects. So they were underused and the high top performers were overused. And so they weren't optimizing their resourcing. They had enough capacity, but they weren't optimizing it in the right way. So what happens there as well is that when you start to show people that a really good resource management plan and it will optimize it, means your life will be better. You will not have to work crazy hours. And you as a junior employee will get to upskill and learn new things, right? You'll get to work on projects that are interesting to you. So it can really drive employee happiness when you have optimized your resourcing plan. So I think proving that and showing that the value of resource management is so crucial to the organization in all facets is a really great way to overcome sort of that reticence to try new software or a new sort of function in the organization. I know I've talked a lot, but the last one and is one that is really personal to me as well is also removing redundancy. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times people are frustrated because they have to add the data in several systems. They got to add in the PM system, they have to add it in their financial system, and they have to add in the RM system. And all of a sudden they're frustrated because it's just redundant work. They're just doing the same work over and over and over. So what I would recommend if you're an organization that is struggling to get that buy-in is invest some time in implementing integration so that people are adding it to one system and not having to repeat that work several times over. And again, I mean, obviously I would recommend you do it in the RM tool, but you can do it in the PM tool as long as it's driving into the RM tool and the time tracking, all of that stuff. but having a really more cohesive and sort of robust tech structure that integrates and have all the systems talking to each other, whether that's via data lake or just really towards direct integrations, is so important to make sure that the tool and resource management as a whole is really embraced by the whole organization.
Beautiful. That was so well said. Thank you both. And now, just as we're wrapping up this post-webinar Q&A session, I'm just curious to hear from you as we're stepping now back and looking at everything we have discussed. What is one thing you're taking away personally? As you're both experts, I'm really curious, what has been something that stuck with you from everything we have covered, and we covered so much? Julie, would you like to start?
Sure. So I think one of the things that came up consistently was skills and the importance of skills, and how much having the right skills and aligning the right people does impact your forecasting. The other piece that I think had questions come in and there was some broadened conversation was capacity planning, and how to align, all of those things you do with forecasting with your capacity planning.
Beautiful. Great observation. Thank you. Lisa, what did you notice? What are you taking
Yeah,
away?
I think similar. I think the theme again is just related to having to invest time in managing all of this, right? So it really can't be a side project. You have to actually dedicate some time to resource management and forecasting capacity. It's really, really important. So because or else data falls out of date, you're not organized in such a way that will be efficient for your organization. And then the other one, I think, connected some of the questions about, some of the data not being up to date and people struggling to adopt, really a new tool or predominantly this function. Again, I think that's a reality of all the world. We all work with 17 different softwares, with 17 different applications. There's always going to be that complexity. So I think for me, what I take away, what I'll bring back to my team as well, just related to this, is like, we need to make things simple and easy for people. It's really, really crucial. And I think
Yes.
sort of ensuring that our processes, our workflows, our software is really aligning to make it as easy and as obviously valuable to people, the more people will really buy in and have this sort of uptake in this field. So I think for me, that's really the key part, is I want to be sure that we're delivering the best experience, not just from a CS perspective, but from a product and engagement perspective.
Nice. Awesome. And as I look through the notes, I think something that's really standing out to me is the role of the resource manager inside the organization. It's this link, this glue, this connecting piece in that beautiful puzzle we call an organization, right? We talked a lot about the importance of having regular interlocks with the project managers. We talked about the necessity to get buy-in even from the leadership team. So having a good communication kind of happening there. We talked about the importance of no backdoor resourcing. And so really helping people understand the impact that might have. You talked about the importance of having good relationships with the sales team, Julie, right? So really building out these relationships as a resource manager is a fundamental key to success that I'm taking away from this beautiful conversation with you two. So thanks very, very much for the time that we have spent together. I found it extremely enriching, and I hope so does our audience. So thank you both very, very much.
Thank you so much.